largely welcomed by many, but as you're seeing, criticised by some. So let's take you back to Friday's announcement. The Basic Education Department said that they have delayed the reopening of schools by 2 weeks due to concerns about the second wave of the coronavirus. Learners will now return to school on the 15th of February and others at different dates, but the 15th is the one that has been highlighted by the department. Now, let's talk to our education expert, Professor Mary Metcalfe, about how this is going to affect the academic year, among other issues. Prof, always good to have you. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much.
So we had a look now, some schools that are defying the announcement, and it's a bit concerning, especially for parents that are felt that they have no option, that if they leave their kids at home, they will be missing parts of the syllabus. But if they take them, there is a huge risk that not, whether they get it or, their children get it. It's a big problem. How do you feel about schools that are defying the announcement?
Firstly, Leanne, I think we really must lower the temperature. We need to reach a common understanding with a clear rationale that the public understands, that the teacher unions support, that the school governing bodies support, and that the Private Schools Association support, so that we can provide leadership for people in a very confusing time. Clearly, it's in the best interests of the country for schools to open as soon as it is safe. But at the moment, everyone can see that the pandemic is on such a surge in the country. And I understand that there are concerns amongst parents and amongst teachers about returning to school while the pandemic is raging. The reasons for the delay in opening make a great deal of sense, because we need to flatten the curve. We see our health facilities being overburdened. But there are people who have very strong arguments to say that the safest place for children, for many children, is at school. They have access to not only nutrition, learning, but also social interaction, which is so important for young learners. So my strong view is that at this stage, lower the temperature, have meaningful discussions, bring everyone to a common position, and make sure that schools can open as soon as possible.
The reality is, and we understand that this is the ideal, and we, as the Deputy Basic Education Minister was saying when she heard that certain schools are going to be opening, is that, we all live in the same country. There shouldn't be a scenario where some are better than others or some are exempt. But do you think the announcement perhaps should have been stronger from the Basic Education Department? In my opinion, it sounded strong enough. It sounded like exactly as it's being interpreted by many other schools, saying that we are telling you to stay closed and we will open the 15th of February. But many are reading into it and doing their own thing, if we can put it that way. Do you think it should have been even stricter to say not that we urge you to open on the 15th, or that we are basically saying these are the rules, you may not open before that, and that's the end of that? Do you think that perhaps would have gotten rid of some of the confusion that we're seeing right now?
I think it's even more complicated. The underlying concern is one of equity, that perhaps schools and communities which have access to greater resources will be able to manage the reopening more safely than schools that have less resources. I personally feel that we need the framework of what it means for schools to be able to safely open and strict compliance with that. But I personally feel that we need to have a much more differentiated application of that framework, because levels of community infection are much higher in some parts of, well, in some districts than others. I think we need to understand that if in 3 months' time there's a surge in a particular locality, that locality may need to close down schools for a while. Now, underlying this tension is several things. One, the sense that there is going to be inequality. We as a country have to accept that it is the poorest children who will have been impacted by the pandemic in multiple ways. that we need to give greater support to those schools. We secondly need to know that a head start of 1 week or a closure of 2 weeks isn't going to change the trajectory of learning over the catch-up period of 2 or 3 years. So I would argue for greater flexibility, for greater steps to be taken to support the most marginalized who don't have access to online learning at home, and an acceptance as a country that we need to support a catch-up program of several years. I would myself aim at this stage to reduce the temperature and bring a common understanding of the conditions under which schools should open safely and the interrelationship of schools opening with levels of community infection.
We obviously lost a lot of teaching days last year. We know. I mean, it was months of teaching that was lost. And as you say, it's the poorest of the poor that have suffered due to this. But may I just ask, has the department learned nothing? We're now moving into a new year. Surely there were plans being made behind the scenes to try and better the scenario that we had last year. Perhaps, doing something that could help these learners that have been sitting at home and doing absolutely nothing, arranging packs, getting things to them, trying to ensure that there is not as much of a loss to the education as there was last year, because we obviously realise that there is a major problem in the education system. But perhaps leaders behind the scenes could have been doing something, because we knew that this year wasn't going to be much better than last year, if not worse, in fact.
And we knew that 2021 wasn't going to be normal, because learners would still be alternating attendance weekly or daily, and there would be a requirement for learners to be supported in learning at home. So guidance was given to schools, guidance was given to teachers about how to plan for learning at home. But Leanne, the quick fix of having online learning is something that's out of the hands even of the education department, because fundamentally learners would need to have devices that they could use for several hours a day in which to learn. That would mean an individual device. In families where more people perhaps have access to a smartphone, but it's a shared phone. So it's access to devices, it's access to Wi-Fi, which is not reliably distributed across the country. Thirdly, it's access to data, and all of us know how expensive data is. So this is an ecosystem of support that belongs across government, it belongs across our society. And while we have to aspire to increasing access to online learning, the substantial obstacles are material, they're large, and it's not going to be very easily to fix them quickly. Last year, there were important initiatives, such as Woza Matrix, which provided broadcast to the grade 12s. That, I believe, has to be reintroduced this year, because our grade 11s lost so much time that they're further behind than the grade 12s of 2020. But that was an enormous undertaking, because there had to be work done to bring all of the stakeholders together to make content that was suitable available across multiple platforms. And that was just for the grade 12s. So putting in a new system of radio work, of TV work, of online work isn't something that can be done very quickly.
I think what's the most difficult thing is, once again, to see the gap that is now, again, being even further widened between those that have and those that have not. And that is, I think, what is the most devastating part of all of this, because you're seeing some schools that have the ability to go online, going online, and they're continuing the academic year as if, that obviously there's a little bit getting in the way of the fact that they're not going to be doing face-to-face learning, but the kids are still learning and they're still growing and they're still getting an education. However, the majority of South African children are sitting at home or playing in the streets and getting absolutely no form of education. I know you spoke to television. I know you spoke to these broadcasts that, we obviously could have to try and help the situation a little further. Just finally, in a parting note, Prof, what else can we do? I mean, I know you say it's beyond the hands of the education department in terms of where we are with technology, but you know, it seems that we're not doing enough for our children, and the holes in our education system are being found and seen now more than ever before. What do we do?
In terms of COVID, what we must do is to make sure our schools are safe so that they can open as soon as possible. They need to be safe for teachers in particular, because we all know that COVID has different risk levels in terms of age, and teachers and the workers at the school are the people that are most at risk. Community and families need to work with schools so that schools follow the practices of safety, that they have the resources, and we need to get schools open as quickly as possible, because in the short term, that's our best mechanism for creating routines of learning, for supporting learners, for making sure that they have access to school nutrition, and that we get on with not only covering the curriculum, but the whole network of social support and routine and discipline that goes with being schools. The larger issues of equity and education in the country require that we prioritize support for those schools that serve the most vulnerable learners.
All right. Prof, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for talking to us. Education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe talking about the delay of the opening of schools that, of course, as we know, is going to affect the academic year even further. We're going to take a break here on the programme. When we return,